All right, it's great to be back this week. It's exciting to be here because I'm speaking to a very fascinating person I've known for years. I don't know if can call him a friend of mine. I don't know if he would tolerate the idea of having a young friend of my type. His name is Leon Louw. He's the executive director at the Free Market Foundation. Not just the face of the Free Market Foundation. He has also done remarkable work in helping South Africa become a democracy, the democracy that we are today. He was involved in the struggle against the apartheid system and contributed intellectually in what would help advance the idea of a democratic South Africa. Leon, it's great to see you, sir.
It's good to be with you, and of course we are friends, and I'm honored to say that you're my friend.
Yes. Yeah. So, Leon, for some people, I want you to get, because I've just mentioned something that isn't widely known, at least in my observation, and that is you were the anti-apartheid activist. You fought
Yes.
against apartheid. Tell me a bit about that.
Yes, it's of course it's a long story. It's a long struggle. I started in the 1960s. I came from a very conservative, I suppose some would say right-wing background, family, white Afrikaners. Although there was a sense in which my father and my relatives were what would today maybe be called liberal, but within that context of the pro-apartheid extended family and relations. When I went to university, Wits University, I became exposed to Marxism and the anti-apartheid movement. And I became, as the picture that I see behind you, Thomas Sowell, who also had his period as a young Marxist, the way I did. Like him, I was eventually converted. Unlike him, I wasn't converted by any great intellectual journey, but by a very practical one, which is relevant to my joining the struggle. Firstly, the intellectual Marxism. In those days, if you were anti-apartheid, and I was simply, for me, racism just seemed, and it still does, an extraordinarily ridiculous idea. I don't see why I should discriminate for or against people depending on their eye color or their hair color or their height. So why should skin color have any relevance at all? It just never made any sense to me. It was just sort of hugely irrational. And so I started opposing it. And in those days, if you were anti-apartheid, it meant you were communist. That was just the two went together. So I joined the communist underground and cells and movement and used to have meetings that were considered illegal and dangerous in Soweto in the days when there was so much smog. On a bright day when you could see the stars in Bryanston, you could not see the stars or even the moon in Soweto because it was so smog, because people were burning dung and coal and wood and so on. There was no electricity, obviously. So that is my background. I started my journey away from communism by a very practical thing. I saw that under apartheid, black South Africans basically had the elimination of class. They all lived on government-owned land. They all went to government schools. They were used government transport. Everything was run and controlled by the government, labor, where you could live, how you could work, what work you could do. And I said to the other intellectuals, I said, why are we against apartheid? Apartheid is communism for black people. Isn't that a good thing? Do we want for white people what we now have for black people? Or do we want for black people what we have for white people? And white people had capitalism, to put it very simply, or market economy, and black people had socialism or communism. And I never got good answers to that. It didn't make any sense to me. And, a thing like land ownership, I said the greatest damage inflicted on black South Africans was land dispossession. But that is a communist view. Under communism, there should be land dispossession. It's in the freedom, the EFF charter, for example, manifesto. All land should belong to the state. So I said, but don't we want black people to be landowners? And anyway, I just used to ask all the wrong and embarrassing questions. And I gradually decided no. And then my final conversion, I'll try and be quick, was a little story. I was a young legal clerk at the same time as Cyril Ramaphosa, by the way. He and I were friends. We used to meet regularly for lunch. We were both, I was chair and he was deputy chair of the Article Clerks Association and so on. But anyway, I walked out of my office and I saw an old lady, happened to be black. I hate even mentioning race, but anyway, sometimes it's relevant. Sitting on the sidewalk in Bree Street in the corner of Rissik where I was, and she suddenly got up and ran away around the corner, and I didn't understand why. And then I saw a police vehicle pull up, and one policeman got out and he kicked her basket of fruit and money and food over the road, and it rolled across the road. And the other one chased her around the corner, and she was old and frail, and he arrested her, and they brought her back, bundled her into the back of the vehicle in a very aggressive, violent way. I was absolutely shocked. I went down to what in those days was called the traffic department, now the Metro Police, and started finding out what's going on over here. They complained. They wanted to arrest me for interfering with the exercise of their duties. And I met over there Lawrence Mavundla, who became president of Black Business Council and LAFCOC and Atshib and others. He was then a mine workers union shop steward, I think. And he was also there about another street trader who had been arrested and charged. And then I thought, hold on a sec, under communism, street trading is not allowed. So why am I wanting to defend a street trader? And then I thought, well, no, this is wrong. Communism is just wrong. People should be allowed to own land. Black people, they should be free to trade on the streets. And then I thought, well, if a little old lady should be free to trade and sell apples and tomatoes on the sidewalk harmlessly, what about big business? Is there a difference? And I just thought, no, I can't see why the freedom of a bank, of a multinational corporation shouldn't be the same as the freedom of a street trader. They should just be the same law for everybody. So that was my conversion, was actually seeing a street trader brutalized. That finally converted me to being a free market libertarian as I now am. It was not overnight, it was a process. But then I continued to be in the anti-apartheid struggle. I worked with the Mandelas, with the Winnie Mandela's football team. I worked with the Committee of 10, with the various, I traveled overseas, I became a courier. I met with people like Johnny Makatini and others, became close friends. Even Jacob Zuma I was very close to. And so I'm honored to have met all the luminaries. And then also I never had a political affiliation. I just wanted good policies. I didn't care who the government was. So I was also close, as it happens, to F.W. de Klerk. And I was actually carried some messages between him and I can't name who in exile, people in exile who are still alive. And but I was somehow an intermediary. I fully supported the anti-apartheid struggle. I thought apartheid was a complete abomination and that we should have the same freedom, which basically means free markets, and liberalism for black people as for white people. In other words, communism got it back to front. As the EFF now has it back to front. They seem to want what Foot wanted for black people. Well, this is crazy. How could they, are they all just too young to realize the contradiction and the anomaly? But I'm all for, I work with the EFF, trying to get property rights and title for people in informal settlements, peasant farmers. I'm non-political. I find politics complicated and I don't understand it. but I do understand human rights and freedom and the liberty of individuals to do as they wish. And that's how I became anti-apartheid. I was, and people like Johnny Makatini, who ran the ANC office for the United Nations in New York, they tried to recruit me into the ANC, and I said, but I'm a liberal now. I became one. And he said, we need that in the ANC, as actually did O.R. Tambo. He said, we are not in the ANC communists or socialists. We are anti-apartheid. So I fitted in perfectly with the anti-apartheid movement, including, if I may say, ZAPO, the PAC. I was close to all of them. And I did interact with the government, with the political, what would be called white political parties, now DA, and I met wonderful people. I kept thinking, but the people on both sides are such wonderful people. Why can they not see that and work together and cooperate together? Even some of the homeland leaders, I used to think, why are these people in conflict? I was friends with Makankiza, what was his name, at Fort Hare University. He became the premier, and I'm very bad with names, and we worked together in the underground. So I was I'm not proud is not the right word. For me, being anti-apartheid it was just normal. It was sort of obvious. I mean, why wasn't everyone, in my view? It wasn't, I don't deserve any recognition or credit. It was just an observation. It was just stupid, that's all.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you about, because you've given this journey of yours, where you come from and how you think and what transformed you. And I would like to get your views about the labor unions. Let's speak specifically about COSATU. Yeah. What do you think the role of unions is in South Africa? Do you think they have benefited people of South Africa over the past 27 years of our democracy, or do you think they've caused damage? How do you see labor unions in South Africa and their role?
Well, firstly, let's be clear that I fought very much for the labor union movement. There were, during the apartheid years, what we called white unions and black unions, and I was in favor of both. So, and unlike people like us, typically free market, libertarian, neoliberal, classical liberal, whatever, who seem to be innately against unions, I think that's a mistake. Unions are, let's understand philosophically, simply freedom of association of people with a common interest. There's no difference in principle between a trade union and a chamber of commerce or a chamber of business or the banking association. These are simply people with something in common who form associations to advance their interests. Now, the degree to which unions might have caused damage in South Africa is the same as the degree to which industrialists might have caused damage by getting the government to impose their policies, you see. Mm-hmm. The unions themselves didn't do any harm. They just represented their members. That's their job. They must go and negotiate better and safer working conditions, better pensions and medical schemes and higher incomes. That's their job. The trouble is that the unions got the government after the apartheid alliance was for the anti-apartheid, the tripartite alliance was formed, which, by the way, in my day, there was no alliance. The ANC and the Communist Party were actually quite alien to each other, where there was a lot of animosity, and even the unions and the ANC didn't have a common goal. So people, for example, now talk about the National Democratic Revolution as if it's an ANC policy. It's not. It was a Communist Party policy when they were enemies or rivals, let's say. And it was a means of taking over South Africa for communism. And to this day, it's never been an ANC document, even though everyone says so. In fact, there isn't even such a document. It's one chapter of a document produced by the SACP. Anyway, I don't want to deviate too much, But when the unions emerged and became lawful, for which I was completely 100% in favor of it, and I still am, they did not have the power of government at their disposal. The white union, the white mine workers union, for example, and it lobbied for minimum wage laws. And it was very clear on why. It said it wanted minimum wage laws to keep blacks out of the labor market, black people. The white mine workers union understood perfectly well that if job reservation wasn't working for them because people just ignored it, and black people were being employed everywhere, and it was impossible to enforce them. Anyway, job reservation applied only to a minority of jobs at its height. What they wanted was a minimum wage law, because what was happening is black people were migrating to the cities and offering to work for less and taking over white jobs. So the mine workers union understood perfectly well that the way to protect people with a job is to price people without a job out of the market. And that is now what COSATU does. It seeks a minimum wage law so that its members are protected against the unemployed. People think a minimum wage law is something by the workers against the employers. No, that's actually got nothing to do with it at all. It's by workers against unemployed workers. It's people with a job denying a job to the people without a job. And that's what it is. Now, the union would do no harm at all if it negotiated wages with employers or employer associations. The way they do harm is to get the government to do it for them, to impose a minimum wage law, or to make, for example, bargaining councils compulsory. And if the government didn't do that, if bargaining councils, they're fine, they're good, a good thing. It's good to bargain. That's a free market thing to do. But it should not have the force of regulation. It should be the free choice of those employers and those workers who want to work with the bargaining council. It should not apply to non-members. There should be no extension of bargaining council agreements, which are perfectly good, to unemployed people, non-unionized people, and employers who are not with that particular employers association. They should all be free. It should not apply to non-parties, workers or employers. So it's a long answer, Phumlani, but unions are very desirable and very harmless. In fact, provide a very important service, provided the government doesn't force union membership and force union ideas on non-unionized people. We should just have the freedom of unemployed people to offer whatever they wish, work where they wish. And my last point before handing back to you is someone you know, my colleague Eustace Davey, came up with really a brilliant idea. And he said, leave the laws, they are, won't be so harmful, but just give an exemption certificate to the unemployed. Allow the unemployed people who are looking for a job to go and take whatever job they wish. And if you don't like what they paid or don't like their working conditions, that's patronizing. Let them decide if they prefer a job they can get to what they had before, which was being unemployed, which is undignified and terrible and disgusting, actually, to leave someone unemployed. And our hearts should all go out to the right of unemployed people to do whatever they wish, being self-employed in the informal sector as traders, peasant farmers, or getting whatever job they can get offered to them, for example, by an informal trader. Informal traders can employ people for and they do, for very, very low incomes to operate 2 or 3 points of selling stuff on the sidewalk, or making burglar bars in their backyard, or fixing cars, or making clothing, or whatever. There's hundreds and hundreds of informal sector industries and jobs employing people, and it shouldn't be illegal. The informal sector business is now unlawful. The employment is unlawful, and that's what unions, unfortunately, not unions. Unions didn't achieve that. The government did that. The government did it by imposing these restrictive licensing laws and labor laws. If they are relaxed or repealed, there will be no unemployment, and people will be self-employed or will be employed by someone else, and only they should be allowed to make that decision. Any interference with that is a violation of their liberty and their dignity.
So what do you think of this, the alliance between the ANC and COSATU? Because people are saying that what's damaging is that, in fact, I also have that view that what's damaging in South Africa is that the ANC, the ruling party, sleeps in the same bed with COSATU, the labor unions. And the ANC is a governing party. So what you are going to have is that you will have COSATU putting pressures on the ANC, a governing party, so the ANC implements or pushes for policy that really favors the labor unions. So would you say that alliance is very much sort of not desirable?
Yes, I have been in favor of the alliance being dissolved. It should have been dissolved in 1992-93 with the unbanning, and it certainly shouldn't have lasted beyond 94. I spoke to one of the very, very senior people, I won't name him because I don't have permission to, of the ANC at the time. And I said, the problem that you now have is the alliance with the tripartite alliance, Communist Party, COSATU, and the ANC, and it's time to dissolve it. And he said we should have dissolved before 94. It has been a handicap to the ANC. And now that the ANC has fallen below 50%, it used to hold desperately onto COSATU and the SACP because it was desperate to get votes that they might bring and desperate to stay in power. Now that that it's clear that the SACP and COSATU in my view, have been a handicap. I think they've done harm. I think the ANC would have done a lot better politically without them. And the sooner the ANC puts an end to this phony alliance, we know that it's ridiculous, the internal conflicts, the paradigm differences. I mean, how could you say the ANC, which according to the EFF is neoliberal, can be in an alliance with the Communist Party? It simply that doesn't make any intellectual, political, philosophical sense to me. And COSATU as a partner, COSATU has, of course, dwindled. It's had big groups leaving it, and it now really is largely a government employee union. And it should just negotiate with the government as a union of government workers, mainly. And the other parts of it just negotiate with those employers. So it is harmful. It is harmful not just to labor relations and to bring us bad laws, which is now a minority union. It has many, many fewer members than the number of employed or unemployed people, and is dwindling. And I think that's bad. I think COSATU would also be better if it just became a trade union and stopped trying to be, it's ambivalent now. It's got schizophrenia. Is it the government or is it a union movement? The government is ambivalent. Is the ANC, are they a union movement? Are they liberal? Are they communist? I mean, it's time they formed a generation after apartheid, an identity. Who are they? And they don't even know who they are now. And this alliance causes, it's the wrong use of the word schizophrenia, but nonetheless people use it for this, an identity crisis. And the sooner the ANC becomes a purely apolitical party and weans it of the communist, let the Communist Party be a political party, let it contest. It apparently will get very few votes. And let COSATU be a trade union. This side, none of them really know which are they. Are they the government or are they a trade union? And they need to go home tonight as a trade union, and that's it. They're no longer somehow pretending to be in the government and failing. I mean, it's a failed allegiance and alliance. It should be abandoned. It should have been abandoned before 94.
Yeah. Now, Leon, there are people, some people, they say that, the labor market is very much there is a great deal of exploitation in the labor market. That we need the minimum wage, the national minimum wage, so that we try and reduce exploitation of workers. People being paid slave wages. That's the term that is being used. You are in opposition of minimum wage laws. And how to respond to those people? People who say you have to have these laws in order to eliminate or reduce exploitation of workers being paid slave wages. What's the response to those people?
Yes, well, let's start by saying the people I care about are not the people with a job, whether or not they've got slave wages. These are the fortunate people. There are fewer of them than the people who have no job at all. And if you are a remotely decent human being and you have any human compassion, whatever, you would, I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but forget about the people with a job and concentrate on the people without a job. And after the introduction of the minimum wage law, what happened is the number of unemployed people rocketed upwards and is now about 10 million. It was then about something like 7 million. So we've got millions of people who have lost their jobs, now live without dignity in not inequality. Inequality just means, you know, compared to a billionaire, a millionaire is poor. Inequality just means a difference. Well, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're in destitution. That means they live under shocking conditions. It means that they do not have food. They can't feed their children. They can't buy them books for school. They have no lighting. They have no toilets. You know, I spend a lot of time in informal settlements, and these people who carry on about minimum wage laws, they don't go there. They don't know how those people live. They don't see, for example, at the Marathon and Delport informal settlement, one of the biggest and poorest in South Africa, the bucket toilets, which should be cleaned by contract with an outsourced contractor twice a week, are cleaned once every 2 weeks. It is filthy and disgusting. Those are the people I care for. Now, as to exploitation, the famous socialist economist Joan Robinson in Britain during the 1940s made a famous statement. She said there is only one thing worse than being exploited by a capitalist, and that is not being exploited by a capitalist. That being exploited is fortunate. It means you've got a job and an income, and we can call it exploitation. But that doesn't stop the fact that people who made a personal choice to take that job at that income under those conditions because it was better than the alternative. We must understand the choice they had was something worse. So as long as we can get something better, we should rejoice and celebrate and be happy. And labeling something slave wages, labeling something exploitation. You know, exploitation is actually a good word. You exploit mineral resources, meaning you mine. You exploit rain by farming. These are good words. You know, you exploit a river by building a dam. And to exploit a worker means to pay somebody out of their free choice more than they were otherwise getting. So I would say, I don't know how a compassionate, decent human being can worry about exploitation when there are 10 million unemployed people. That's what should worry you. And how do you get those people a job? You say having some job. The government creates jobs. Government creates these job schemes where they pay people much less than the minimum wage to do what? Cut the grass on the side of a national road. It is ridiculous. These people should be producing real stuff, farming, working in the informal sector, making burglar bars, carpentry, anything. So I would say it's a long answer to a short question. But if you've got human compassion, then you should want people to have a job. If they have a job, then you can try and make that a better job, but not by throwing them out of a job, which is what these wage laws do. They say you may not work unless you can find somebody to pay you more than you are worth.
Yeah. Now, Leon, we have 1 minute. I want you to be speedy in your answer here. The former president of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk, has passed away. He died today. You know, people are debating out there. I mean, is this the guy who we should celebrate? Is this the guy who we should vilify? You know, where do you stand on the man, and how do you see his role in South Africa's history? Just briefly, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, firstly, I'm not binary. It's not all good or bad. The man was a complicated man, and he did a lot of good, and he did, before he was actually the president, quite a lot of bad. He was considered on the right wing. So I think he became a wonderful, dedicated South African, and he should be celebrated as the one who took the bold step. And people forget this. He ran an election. He ran a referendum. And a referendum amongst white voters on whether they want to end apartheid, and 70% or so voted to end apartheid. That's what he achieved. He got white people to choose to end apartheid. That is never spoken about anymore. That was very brave, very bold, and successful. And for that, if nothing else, he needs recognition.
Yeah. Do you think that now some concerns are that, well, okay, let's put F.W. de Klerk aside. There are these comments that black people who were involved in the negotiations of the founding of South Africa, that these people, they sold us out. You know, they sold us out at Codesa. That white people, they kept the assets. They kept the resources. We black people didn't get anything. How to respond to those people who call people like Nelson Mandela sellouts?
Yeah, I think that they're typically people who weren't around at the time. People who were around at the time knew exactly what the complex were. And it's very easy for younger people who were maybe teenagers then or weren't even born to look back and think it could have been different. And of course, it is instructive that the white people, or many white people, say that de Klerk and co sold out the whites, handed over power without any real protection. I don't think that's true. We have the protection of the Constitution. And there are black people who say that they sold out by letting white people keep everything. Well, that's certainly also simply untrue. That what has happened is you can look at any statistic. The ANC needs me as their propagandist. There's been a fantastic rise in living standards of black South Africans since '94 in every objectively measured way. Literacy rates, life expectancy, square meters of housing, motorized transport, and so on and so forth. Access to healthcare has been fantastic, and it's been a great accomplishment. So to say nothing changed is simply factually wrong. And then also the change might not be fast enough for me. I would like to see it faster. But to say there hasn't been change, anyone who goes into a shopping mall, go to that big one in Midrand, Mall of Africa, and look who's there. Now, 20 years ago, it was white people in a very sophisticated, modern, rich. You go there now, it is demographically representative. Mostly black people eating in expensive restaurants, buying wonderful clothes, arriving in nice cars. Now, I'm not an apologist. I don't want to say it's good enough. I just want to say that we need to understand it's not simple. It's quite sophisticated. You yourself are a black person with a much higher living standard than you would have had before '94, and we know, you go, for example, and this, I know you want me to be quick, so let me be quick. Anyone who knows Bushbuck Ridge or Bosbokrand, and if you don't, it is the biggest residential area in South Africa, which you can see on Google Maps. It is virtually 100% black. It used to be one of the poorest black areas of South Africa, pigs and goats and mud roads and mud huts and so on, up to '94 or so. You go there now, it is tar roads, traffic jams, shopping malls, thousands of middle-class homes, thousands. And you say it's what I call research by looking. there has been just a fabulous improvement in the living standards. And it didn't happen to be, people think that the way to benefit Black people is to take from white people. No, that's ridiculous. The way to benefit Black people is to produce wealth and opportunities and freedom and grow and become rich. If the economy is rich, everybody is richer, and we haven't done that badly. I would have liked to see us do a lot better, but at the same time, I think we must see that there's quite a big silver lining in what many see as a dark cloud.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Leon. It's great. It was great to talk to you. I really appreciate it for you to sit down with me and share your views, your insights, your experience as a libertarian. So I mean, it's always nice to have a chat with you. So thank you so much.
And thank you, and to the listeners and viewers. It's been an honor.